Hello and welcome to the Indie Alternative Podcast. It's me, Chris. Welcome to episode 1 of season 4. It's finally here and it's really good to be back. On this episode, I'm delighted to be joined by Rob Goodwin of the band The Slow Show. And I first got into The Slow Show, I think, back in 2014, 2015 maybe. Saw them live a few times and really enjoy the band. They've got a really deep sound, and Rob's got quite a unique vocal which adds so much depth to the tracks that they produce. We talk a bit about the new album and the tour that's coming up in February, and I've put a link to their website in the show notes so you can follow what's happening there and check out their music, because it is really ace. Just before we hit the interview, here's a quick reminder of all the ways that you can support the podcast. So follow on social media. Just search for the Indie Alternative Podcast on Instagram, Twitter and Facebook. And as you know, this is completely independent. I don't have any ads or sponsorship. So if you want to support financially, you can do. And there's a link to a coffee donation page in the show notes as well. And there you can donate £3 or subscribe monthly. It's completely up to you. And the last thing that really helps is if you rate and review, and it only takes a few minutes, so if you could do that, that'd be fantastic. So that's it for the waffle, and here's Rob. Welcome to the podcast, Rob Goodwin. How are you?
Very well, thank you.
Whereabouts are you?
I'm in Oberbil in Dusseldorf in Germany.
You've been there for a few years now, haven't you? You've moved out there.
Yes, been here three years.
What was the catalyst to get you to sort of move there permanently?
Catalyst, I met my girlfriend at a festival here in Germany. She's German, and so we a bit of a decision between Manchester, which will always be home. I'm so proud and close to the city. It will always be a huge part of me. But we decided Dusseldorf. At the time, I was thinking that I'll be touring a lot, so it seemed fairer that I moved to Dusseldorf. But that was all about to change. But no, really happy to be in Dusseldorf.
You've been very busy in Europe, especially Germany, Switzerland, and other parts of like the EU, the lovely EU. What are the audiences like there? Are they different to the UK audiences, or is there some sort of similarities?
They are very different. It's certainly one of the things I love about touring, just seeing how the audiences are different. I mean, there's a lot of common sort of things, but they're very different. I mean, even going from somewhere like Holland to Belgium, you really notice them right next door, and the drives are so short to get to from country to country. But when we started, we were lucky enough, we were asked to go to Switzerland and do a short tour there, and I think it was so important for us, and it was so we were so it was so fortunate because the crowds there were so attentive. It was like you could hear a pin drop, and we were still really finding our feet. So we had so much still to learn, but they really gave us a chance there. And I think if we'd have started in a busy bar in London or Manchester or somewhere in the UK, I think it would have been much harder for us to get going. And I think playing in some of those places, particularly in Switzerland and in Belgium, the crowds were so attentive, and it was really a really fortunate opportunity for us to start there.
Do you think there's more of a patience in terms of like letting a band grow in front of them, as opposed to what feels to be like in the UK audiences? Not all of them, but there seems to be like they want an immediate delivery, if you know what I mean. And if it's not there, you tend to lose the audience quite quickly, especially if you're first starting out, as you say.
Yeah, I think there's definitely, I mean, we love it now in the UK as well. But I think it's very hard. There's a section between, or there's a time between starting and then getting a bit of momentum. And that first year when you're really finding your feet, I think that can be difficult in the UK because you very you very often end up in a bar with 100 people, and it's noisy and it's busy, and because you're not well known, people are less likely to be hanging off your every note of music. So I think it's a little bit busier, it's a little bit bustlier in the UK, and it's probably a little bit more difficult. I mean, for bands like us, it's not the loudest music in the world, so it's really nice when you're lucky enough to play to people that are really attentive, and we got that opportunity at a really early stage, so really grateful for that.
Well, when did it all start for you, Rob? I mean, can you remember your first kind of musical influences and what got you into songwriting?
Yeah, I've mentioned this before, but it was really important, a really important part of my life. When I was very young, my parents were, they're not musicians, but they loved music, and we'd go on holidays, and I always remember long drives in the car. They seemed so long at the time. I was probably 7 or 8, and we'd drive from Manchester to Scotland or somewhere, and my dad would be listening to James Taylor and Joni Mitchell, and my mum would be listening to like popular music and Motown. So I was really lucky to be exposed to like a beautiful mix of music, and that had a huge effect on me. And I've never stopped loving those songs, James Taylor. Particularly, like, it was just painfully good songwriting, and it moved me even at that age. I remember being really moved. And
picking up the guitar, would you remember your first kind of pen to paper moment with writing and guitaring?
Yeah, it would have been in Manchester when I was probably in my early 20s. I wasn't really young, I wasn't old, but I know some people start writing really, really young at college and stuff, but it was probably a bit later. Maybe I was between 20 and 25 or something. It would have been around that time.
I mean, lyrically, there's a real richness in sort of the storytelling with the songs that you guys do. And what are you drawing upon in terms of the lyrical content? Is it like a personal response, or are you drawing off other members from the band or experiences?
Yeah, it's probably a mix of all those things. I mean, definitely for us, music's a way of, or it always has been for me, it's a way of making sense of the world and the things that I see and the experiences and how I feel. I feel incredibly lucky as a musician to have this sort of cathartic place that I can always go, and I think really count myself lucky in that respect. It's a way of, expressing yourself and also just understanding how you feel about things. So it's always, it's very much, it's a selfish process, really. You kind of just, when I started, I was just doing it for myself. That it made me, there's more of a cathartic way of figuring out how I felt about things, and that's very much stayed the same, really.
And was there a moment when you guys, in the early days, I guess the very early sort of session times or rehearsal times, where something clicked and you realised that you'd created the Slow Show sound? Or was it something that you had to work towards or try and figure out different kind of incarnations of?
Yeah, I think we're different in the way that we started, perhaps, with the band. We never had an idea how we would sound, but I think often when bands start, they start by looking for people that are into the same kind of things, and we did the opposite. We didn't try to, but we were all into completely different stuff. Joel was very much a traditional jazz guitar player. Fred was into kind of classical music.
Yeah,
he was a classical musician. Yeah, I was into folky, poppy stuff. Chris was into brass bands, and I think the sound of the Slow Show is just a mix of all of those influences, really.
It's very landscapey, for want of a better word. So you kind of create this. It's almost not like a movie soundtrack. So that sounds like cliche, but there definitely is that element to it where it builds, and you have lots of orchestral elements. Sort of, you have the choir that I know you sometimes play with as well live. I mean, how important is it for you to stamp everything with that kind of that style, or is it not something you always gravitate towards? If that makes sense, that question. Sorry.
It does, and it's quite an important one for us, because I think it's a really important question to ask ourselves when we have a general rule, which is just the song is always the most important thing, and if it requires an orchestra to create the feeling that we want to create, we use it, but we're very careful not to fall into sort of just going with, if an orchestra sounds beautiful and big and warm, and it's very easy just to throw strings or a choir on something and make it sound huge. But sometimes the song doesn't require that at all. It needs to be intimate and really kind of bare and just a skeleton of chords and words. So that's a question we ask ourselves a lot. What does this song need? And we're always trying to create like just moments of feeling, and that's really important to us. So if the feeling requires huge swells of orchestral movements, then we go with that. But sometimes just an old little guitar and a vocal is enough. So we certainly want to we don't want to do things because we've done it in the past and it works,
And does everybody have a lot of input in the writing process? I mean, do you all kind of come to the table with something?
It's changed very much, and I think that's a big part of why the records have evolved. And when we started it, I think it'd be fair to say I would write the songs mainly on an acoustic guitar, and then Fred would produce them, and then Joel and Chris would put their parts on, which were very important, but they were at a much later stage, the guitar and the drums. And that slowly evolved into a point where the last record, I think everybody was involved and starting ideas. And it was very important for us that it didn't, if I start the songs as a sort of singer-songwriter on a guitar, they tend to go in one direction.
Yeah.
I think for us to remain excited and to feel like we were doing something that excited us, it was important to sort of examine the procedure, the writing process, and we've changed that a lot. So now it's very much a group effort, and I think we're getting some really interesting results, which is nice.
And in those songwriting moments, are you thinking about collaborations as well, or does that something that comes a bit later on? Because you have like a lot of time you have some guest female vocalists as well. But are you thinking of that as you're writing, or is it, like I say, is that something that comes later?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, we always use the vocals like another instrument, but I think the vocals are particularly good at sort of helping tell a story. So I really like the idea of the vocal isn't just for sound in that respect. It's kind of nice to get a call and response, or for a song to sound like a conversation. So often when we use a second vocal, it's often to be a second person, a second narrative, or someone else's perspective. That's the word I'm looking for. That it kind of gives that second perspective on a situation. So we're often thinking of that.
Because you bring it right down to sometimes spoken word, don't you, in terms of the delivery of the vocal. Did that sort of something that you worked on, or did that come by accident? Because I can see, looking at the albums that you've produced, there is a definite change in terms of, the boldness of the tracks on the newer recordings and how you've evolved and how you've managed to, like you say, using your voice as an additional instrument, if you like, and treating it that way and adding the depth that like spoken soft delivery adds. But yeah, in terms of finding that, was that something that came by accident, or was it something that you knew you had in you?
Yeah, it was probably accidental. We've always evolved quite slowly with things, and it was nothing that it wasn't anything we thought for this record we're going to have spoken word, but the tracks just seemed to, again, the songs seemed to benefit from that. And I've always written a lot of poetry, and that always found its way into the music, but it was always sang or sung. And now Mountbatten was the first song that we worked on for this new record, and that spoken word just seemed very appropriate. So we were quite happy with it. So yeah.
And so recording the latest album, or the album that's coming out, Still Life, with this kind of recent situation with recording, I mean, did you find that it wasn't so much of a stretch, in terms of doing it separately potentially and getting it produced elsewhere? Because a lot of musicians have turned to that approach, but it suits more some musicians more than others because of the insular nature of writing and producing. And how did you find the kind of whole pandemic situation with regards to that?
Yeah, we found it really hard, and that probably, I think, to be very honest, we found it very hard. We shouldn't have found it as hard as we did because we've always recorded remotely. But I think we really didn't appreciate the importance of the moments when we were together. So in the past, I've lived here for a while. So on the last record, some of it was recorded here in Manchester, all over the place. But we would always get together probably every 6 weeks to meet, to sort of talk about what the songs, how they were going, how we could improve them. If we were having any problems with the song, we would work on it together. And I think those moments of togetherness were so important. They are so important for us. So to have, we had 2 years basically of absolute remoteness, and it was difficult. We had to sort of get our heads around that and find solutions to it. And so we found it hard.
I guess what's missing in those situations, if you aren't, if you're not led by anyone in particular, but the spontaneity of, being musicians in a room and coming up with something different in front of everybody, and everyone going, oh, that's a different thing. Yeah.
Yeah. You just can't do that with messages and emails and even, Zoom thing. It just felt like we was just lacking a good evening together at times, even just to sit down as friends. And, it felt very, you lose that friendship that you miss that friendship, and that sort of that band mentality.
I guess you're very excited then to be kind of getting back on the road and doing things properly. So the tour's coming up, isn't it? Or have you? When does that start?
That starts in February, hopefully. And we can't wait. I mean, we got together in December for the first time in just under 2 years. It was so nice. It was. It sounds obvious, but I think we've been busy in the past and spent a lot of time together. But I think we've always savoured and appreciated the opportunities that we have as a band. But I've got no doubt we're gonna just savour every moment of it going forward, because it's a cliche, but it's not until something's taken away from you you realise how important it is and how much what a privilege it is.
Are you bringing anything different to this tour, or any guests? Or
we are. We have a guest vocalist and an extra musician from Cologne. She's fantastic. So we really had some incredible moments with her making music so far, and really excited about that special guest. So we're really looking forward to it. We hope it will feel real.
Well, good luck with it all, Rob. And I'm looking forward to hearing the new album. The new album comes out in February as well, doesn't it?
It does, yeah. So looking forward to it. Hope you like it.
It's been an absolute pleasure. Thanks so much for giving up your time, Rob, to speak to me about the band and where you're going and stuff, and the recording process. Has been really interesting. And good luck with the tour and the album.
Thank you, Chris.
All right.
Take care.
Take care. Bye-bye.